Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Ben, and I am evaluating the impact of Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. The book was originally written in only 10 weeks in 1868. Part 2 was written as quickly and came out the following year. Current editions of the book include both parts in one publication. The edition I studied included original ink sketches by Frank T. Merrill, as well as full-color illustrations by Jessie Wilcox Smith. Although Little Women is set during the Civil War and the years that followed, very little of the war is mentioned. Unlike many novels written for boys, the focus is instead on the everyday issues of domestic life during war. Most of the story takes place in and around the March family home in New England, but there are additional storylines that occur in Paris and New York. It reflects the importance of neighborhood society that was common in the late 1800s. The main characters are the four sisters: Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy. Meg is the oldest sister and the most traditional of the bunch. She is a people pleaser who eventually gives up her dreams of wealth and marries for love. Jo is a tomboy and a writer. She is the star of the show and manages to be both lovable and flawed. Beth is the martyr. Shy and quiet, she becomes ill while caring for others. Concern for her well-being helps keep the family together. Amy is pretty and manipulative. She gets what she wants because she knows how to play the game. The other main character of this story is Laurie, the boy next door. Handsome and sensitive, he, like Jo, struggles with society's constraints. At the beginning of the novel, the four sisters are introduced as they are discussing what presents they should buy themselves, but they decide instead to spend their money on presents for their mother. At New Year's, Meg and Jo attend a party, but Jo sneaks away from the crowd and meets Laurie, a boy who soon becomes very important to the March family. He escorts Meg and Jo home from the party when Meg sprains her ankle dancing. Laurie's grandfather, Mr. Lawrence, takes a liking to Beth and gives her a piano that used to belong to his granddaughter, who passed away. Amy and Jo seem to be constantly bickering, and both take rash measures to get even. Notably, Amy burns Jo's manuscript, and Jo almost lets Amy drown. Jo invites Laurie to join in a family newspaper, and the group grows closer than ever. Mr. March falls ill in Washington, D.C., and Jo sells her hair to help her mother pay for the cost of traveling to see him. In her mother's absence, Beth visits the poor neighborhood family, and catches scarlet fever. Amy is sent away to live with their aunt until Beth is better, and although she recovers, Beth remains very weak. Laurie's tutor falls in love with Meg, and they are soon engaged to be married. Thus ends part the first. In part 2, Meg gets married and then has twins. Jo was excited to go to Paris, but their aunt decides to take Amy instead, as she is far more ladylike. Jo ends up moving to New York and meets Friedrich, a German professor who encourages her to improve her writing style. The two start to grow close, and then Jo returns home, where Laurie proposes to her and is refused. Soon after, Beth passes away, and her death has a strong impact on everyone, especially Jo. Laurie goes to Paris, where he meets up with Amy, and the two fall in love and are married. Jo marries Friedrich, and the two move to Plumfield, which Jo has inherited from her aunt. They start a boarding school for boys, and the sisters all end up thankful for the way their lives have turned out. One of the most obvious themes in the novel is gender equality. Jo is an obvious symbol of feminism in this story. She fights against the traditional female roles to the extent that her father even refers to her as his son on occasion. She refuses to bend to social norms, attends a party in a dress with a burn mark, total faux pas, and writes and sells stories to provide for her family. On the other side, Laurie struggles with traditional masculine roles. He prefers music to business and is more sensitive than is typically found amongst men of the time. Along with gender equity, the novel promotes a sense of being true to oneself. This is seen through the way Jo and Laurie refuse to fit in, but also in how Meg willingly changes for others. In particular, there is a scene where she is at a party and allows the other girls to dress her up. She eventually decides that she prefers her own style and doesn't need their high fashion. Many people think of Little Women as an autobiographical story, and to an extent that is true. The March sisters were modeled closely after Louisa's own sisters, with Jo representing Louisa herself. Louisa and her mother were very close, partly because they had such similar personalities and temperaments. Her mother encouraged Louisa's writing, and Louisa, in turn, encouraged her mother to read and write in the journals she kept. Louisa's relationship with her father, however, was more challenging. Amos Bronson Alcott was a philosopher and a socialist, making it very difficult for him to find and keep work. He moved the family to Fruitlands, a farm that he intended to develop into a utopian society, but after 6 months the experiment failed. There were sometimes long stretches when the family survived on just bread and water, in part due to poverty and in part due to Bronson's vegan ideals. This caused tension within the family, especially between mother and father. Louisa struggled to cope with their status. When she was 11, she wrote in her journal, "I wish I was rich, I was good, and we were all a happy family this day." In order to provide for her family and lift them out of poverty, Louisa worked several jobs, but the most profitable was her writing. At first, she wrote mostly sensational stories, but then her editor coaxed her into writing a story for girls. Louisa thought that these moral stories were awful and didn't want to write the novel. Both the immense popularity of the novel and the royalties that came with that success urged her to write part the second, Little Men, Jo and Jo's Boys, to finish the March stories. The Alcotts were part of the popular transcendentalist movement in New England and spent a lot of time with like-minded folks such as Emerson, Hawthorne, and Thoreau. A strong tenet of transcendentalism is individualism over society, something that shows through in Little Women. Each of the sisters struggle with this at one point or another and then decide that they do not need society's approval. Little Women was part of the golden age of literature. It romanticized childhood and dealt with the struggle between being a child and becoming a woman. Like many of the novels of the time, it was didactic in nature, but taught perhaps a different kind of lesson. Domestic concerns were front and center for many girls of this time period. Women often had to rely on marriage to ensure a comfortable lifestyle. Because Meg is portrayed as the most traditional of the sisters, Louisa ends the book with Meg's engagement. After receiving many questions from her readers about who each of the other sisters will marry, she decided to spite the readers by having Jo get married in the end, but not to Laurie. Little Women has become one of the most beloved novels of all time, and fittingly, there have been many adaptations of the story. Other than the well-known film version starring Winona Ryder, there have been silent films, miniseries, radio drama, opera, a Broadway musical, and even an anime series. Little Women has appealed to many generations and is sure to appeal to many more. Here are a list of some of the resources that I used in preparing this presentation, and these will all be linked in the description below. I hope you enjoyed my presentation on Little Women, and read on!